Xeriscaping is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I worked in sustainability for a long time, and so I'm really interested in making sure we reduce water. I know that we're in a drought. I remember I moved from New England to Colorado 22 years ago, and my landlord was talking about this 20-year drought we were in, or at the time it was, a more recent drought. And that was kind of like an obscure topic to me. And I've kind of been learning more and more about it ever since. And so does anybody know where the term xeriscape comes from? That's not sitting over here. Does anybody have any idea? So it's actually an ancient Greek term. Just kidding. So it was coined in 1981 by Denver Water, and it comes from the word for dry, the Greek word for dry, zera or zero or whatever it is. Zeri. So this is why I have experts. Yeah. I look like the expert, but I got the experts here. So anyway, that and 1981 is a long time ago. I know because that was when I was born. So it was 41 years ago this term's been around. So that's kind of
Do you know why they created the term?
No, I don't.
Denver Water was facing a unique situation. They were facing yet another drought, but Denver Water surprisingly wasn't metered. So the community of Denver didn't have water meters in place. They were beginning to install them, so because you can't control what you can't measure. And they were afraid that the community would rebel against people were very scared about water meters. They were afraid they would, their bills would go really high. And so as part of an education and outreach campaign, they coined the term Xeriscape, which is a trademark term, but they let all of us use it. They created a whole education campaign around it so that they could teach the community before the meters went into place how to water appropriately and what practical ways were to reduce water use and also, by the way, chemical use on the landscape so that they could be sort of control their water bill and also manage the various droughts. Interestingly and surprisingly, when they installed the meter, most people's water bill, actually they paid less because people weren't using as much water as had been assumed, which was great. But that's why they invented the term, was specifically to educate their community and help them alleviate some stress about the idea of getting meters, which is, by the way, Salt Lake City has been metered since the 1920s. Just saying.
Cool.
So.
All right. Well, so back to that, it means dry scape. It doesn't necessarily mean zero, like it sounds. So I think let's segue into giving a panelist intro. We have 5 panelists tonight. One is virtual. And Stephanie, do you want to start since you were
It's like mouthed off already?
Yep.
I'm Stephanie Duer. I'm Salt Lake City's water conservation manager. I work in the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities. Public Utilities is responsible for delivering water, sewer services, stormwater protection, watershed protection, street lighting within Salt Lake City proper. But we also deliver water outside of the city into Cottonwood Heights, Millcreek, Holiday, and bits of South Salt Lake and Murray. So it's the water department itself is really large. We're a retail water provider, and which means we're not a wholesaler, so that we sell directly to our customers. You guys are my customers. I work for you. We have, and I don't know if you want me to, is this like the big introduction? You want to know about all our plans? You want to know about the water situation?
I would just say, that was perfect, and we'll kind of keep going through, and then we'll get to questions after.
All righty.
Okay. My name is Marita Tyrolt. I'm the horticulture director at the Red Butte Garden. We just built a new water conservation garden that opened in 2017. That's the largest garden space that we have built, and it's 3 acres. So anyway, you'll have to come up and see it if you haven't.
I am Andrea Washburn. I'm not a landscape architect. I'm a landscape contractor, and I own Andrea Washburn Landscaping. I've been I started quite a long time ago, but Xeriscaping is sort of a newer concept, so for Salt Lake City anyway. So I've been doing it probably the last 10 years. When I worked with another landscaper who taught me a lot of the stuff, he didn't do any of that. So I kind of gotten into it on my own.
Andrea, do you mind speaking up a little bit next time? That's all right. Just
I'll do my best.
gotta
I have
do
a pretty quiet
the speech and
voice.
debate voice.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm Jenna Pike. I live in the neighborhood up the street from Mike on Bryan Avenue. And I have a yard that I've evolved over the 10 years that I've lived in the house to use less water by mostly self-taught xeriscaping methods.
And I appreciate Jenna being gracious about it. I approached all my friends and I was like, I don't have anybody who's local resident. I'm just gonna go look at people's yards and see who it looks cool. And they were like, you gotta talk to Jenna. So she graciously accepted. So we have one other panelist. We'll let him kind of intro himself through the video, I think is probably the best way to do it. He's virtual tonight. So do you want to just go straight into the video now?
Let's give that a shot. If that's all right. Yeah. Here it is. The audio might be a little bit light in this room. I apologize, but it probably would be good in virtual land.
Hi, my name is Stan Holmes. I live in the Capitol Hill area of Salt Lake City, and I appreciate being invited to.
Any audio? Oh no, it's optimized for.
Hey, my name is Stan Holmes. I live in the Capitol Hill area of Salt Lake City.
Audio is good,
and I appreciate being invited to participate in this panel. You've got the front view walking up the sidewalk in front of my house. Xeriscape on the left in the park.
Remember I told you audio was always
If you can move the chat and start it over.
On the right, and our little.
Here we go. I think I've got it now.
Hi, my name is Stan Holmes. I live in the Capitol Hill area of Salt Lake City, and I appreciate being invited to participate in this panel. You've got the front view walking up the sidewalk in front of my house, Xeriscaped on the left in the park strip, and Xeriscaped, Xeroscape combination on the right, and our little dog. We decided to Xeriscape and Xeroscape our property 6 years ago. And so in the front yard, we put in trees, maple trees, which you can't see in this shot, but tall grasses, sumac, Oregon berry, other low water shrubs, and compacted gravel with concrete paver stones. In the backyard, upper, we put in trees. We kept the apple tree. We kept an oak tree. We put in the serviceberry trees down below. We put in tall grasses, sages, lavender, and other low water shrubs, raised garden beds, and compacted gravel with concrete paver stones. The reasons we invested in Xeroscaping, environmental, to conserve water, especially during the current drought, to reduce fossil fuel use from gas in our lawnmower, to reduce pollution, and that would be air pollution and noise pollution. A lot of people don't recognize or realize that when we're talking water conservation, we're also talking reducing air pollution, PM 2.5 and ozone, that's very problematic for Salt Lake Valley, and maintaining lawns contributes to that problem. Also, there's the aesthetic. We got tired of watering all summer long just to have our grass brown out by August. And then there's a financial element to save money on water and gasoline. So what we did was we removed all the sod, we removed the cherry trees, we kept the oak and the apple trees, put in service berries and other trees. We replaced the entire water system with drip lines and sprinklers. We combined vegetated and compacted gravel zones. We put in new hardscape and metalwork. So basically, here's a look. The front yard on the left, the lower backyard on the right of our Xeriscape and Xeroscape efforts that took quite a few months. And this was in 2016. As for the park strip, we decided not to waste any water on the park strip, figuring it evaporates quickly, gets salt from the road in the winter, And so we xeroscaped the park strip. No plants, no water. And we've got neighbors who've done likewise. Xeroscaped the residents and xeroscaped the park strip. Fast forward 5 years to 2021, and the city threatens legal action. So basically, we found out that we were in violation of a code that was written over 20 years ago, and that requires 33% minimum vegetation in a park strip, which of course you'd have to water. Failure to comply, I think we had 2 weeks, would result in the initiation of appropriate legal action. So the city was going to get us. And it was kind of irksome because we found out that the city is okay with this, where you see a morning after a soaking rain, sprinklers watering the sod on the residents and the park strip, and also watering the street. That's not a problem. This is a problem. Low water efforts by the residents. So in any case, this is what the city is going after us for. And over 300 other Salt Lake City residents who've been served these citations since January of last year. Meanwhile, you have the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District is paying homeowners to tear out their sod, the Rip Your Strip program. And our city, Salt Lake, is pressuring residents to keep the sod and use more water. So I guess the question then is, what do you think should be done about this 20-plus-year-old ordinance that's written before the drought got serious, really serious, and doesn't even mention xeriscaping in it? And then another question is the city really serious about water conservation? I guess what I say then is prove it. And then lastly, what can you and I and others do to make real progress on this issue? I look forward to the discussion and would be pleased to answer other questions. Folks are certainly welcome to visit our residents and talk to us about additional folks in our neighborhood who are moving toward xeroscaping and xeriscaping. Thanks.
Great. That was a great video. Thanks, Mike, for helping put that together. Now we're back to the panel.
Cool. So I really like a lot of the points that he brings up about not only saving water, but the pollution factor, and just kind of saving money. And there's a lot of different aspects of it. Like I was alluding before, I have 3 little kids. They like to go play in the Sugar House Creek. That was dried up for a good portion of last year. I love to ski. I want to have lots of snow. They're talking about having to redraw the boundaries of the Salt Lake because it's shrunk so much. I mean, are we going to be able to live here in 30 years? It's just kind of a crazy situation we're in, and I don't know if people realize as dire as it is. Maybe it's not as bad. You all can calm my fears. But so let's dive into some questions. We'll start with you, Marita, and take it from there.
Okay, well, I was asked to just kind of clarify on Xeriscape, and I did want to clarify that because I think that there are a lot of people that misunderstand what Xeriscape actually is. And as you started out, yes, it was coined by the Denver Water Board. There's actually 7 different principles of Xeriscape. And as far as I'm concerned, 6 of them are things that people would be doing anyway, that are just good landscape practices. And the 7th one says that you use less water. Anyway, but just going over the 7 principles. The first one is planning and design. And again, just evaluating your site, noting the sun, the shade, the exposure, what existing elements you want to keep, what you want to change up. I mean, that is just a normal, something that someone would do when you're looking at changing your landscape anyway. Another one is soil improvements. And just, I think all too often people don't necessarily take the time to evaluate the soil that you currently have and whether that fits with what you want to do. And so evaluating your soil, maybe getting a soil test, you can send some soil samples up to the USU analytical laboratories, and they can kind of tell you what they like about your soil, what they don't like about your soil, and give you some recommendations on amendments that you could incorporate into the soil before planting.
I've heard that we need to have iron in the soil.
Utah does tend to be low in iron. It's kind of hard to add that in, but there are products that you can do that with. And I think our water kind of helps keep that off base. But there are plants too that you can choose that maybe aren't as finicky about.
Like my maple trees in my yard are not good choices.
Some of them suffer more than others. On that note, silver maple is one of the worst. I would not recommend anybody plant a silver maple, but the Norway maples do better. So there are options. Another one is efficient irrigation. And this is kind of one of the ones that gets tweaked a little bit. I mean, designing your system around what your landscape design will be. Another term for it is hydrozoning. Irrigating your turf separately from other beds, and essentially other beds, designing the irrigation system so that plants that need more water are getting a little more water, and plants that don't need as much water are getting less water. And you may have some that don't get any water at all after establishment. There's also other efficient ways of watering, watering in the night, during the night, in the evenings or in the morning, so that you don't get as much evaporation. You don't really want to use sprinklers that create a really fine mist, because a lot of that dissipates. And so if you do use sprinklers, then you want something that has a larger droplet size that's not going to be blown off course. But there are also micro sprays, drip and bubblers. And so there's options that people can use depending on what they want to do. Another principle is plant zones. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the irrigation, but it's essentially designing and planting and irrigating your plants by similar water requirements. You're not just kind of throwing everything out in there. But what happens a lot of times is people will overwater an area because they have one particular plant that's struggling, but then they waste water on the whole bed because they're trying to make sure that that particular plant gets water. When in reality, that plant needs to go somewhere else. Anyway, design and irrigate and plant your plants according to their water requirements. Another principle is mulches. And mulches do a lot. They'll lower your soil temperature, they'll reduce weeds. And if you use an organic product, then it can improve or add organic matter back into your soil. You don't have to use an organic product. And sometimes if you're using plants that are xeric, literally, they don't necessarily like the moisture kept near their crown. And so you can get some dieback. So that's when you might have some gravel or small rocks or something that works as a good mulch in that case.
What about that rubber mulch?
I can't say that I prefer.
The issue with some of the rubber mulches is they're made from recycled tires, which on the surface sounds like a good idea, but think about what is in a tire. So many tires have metal components. All of that's ground up. The metal particulate and dust from the metal can become volatilized and also airborne. And it's also sort of permanent and it's not disposable. The nice thing about, say, mulch or even gravel is that with mulch, it breaks down in time and adds into the soil. Rubber is just going to heat the soil more, so it doesn't support your soil health, which you talk about, we're landscaping in part because we want to make our patch of the earth better. Then adding something like manufactured rubber product or plastic may not be the best idea. We may want to rethink that. Sorry for jumping in.
No, thank you. Two more principles. One is turf alternatives, which one could just be using less area, adding a deck, building a patio, or turning it into landscape beds, but less area. Or using a different type of grass. I was going to say turf type tall fescue. There's buffalo grass and blue grama. You can also use other products, like maybe there's some really drought tolerant sedges out there or something else. Stephanie was talking about
a crested wheatgrass blend, which is doing remarkably well at the golf courses. And it doesn't need mowing, a lawn with no mowing.
So I'm excited about trying that myself. And then maintenance. A lot of people, I think, thinks that if you do a Xeriscape, that it will be less maintenance. I really can't say that's the truth. I mean, I think a garden needs maintenance and really, and perhaps sometimes maybe a Xeriscape garden needs more maintenance, especially if you've got drip, because it's just that there isn't a garden that once you plant it, it's perfect. And that you always have to go back and there's this plant you decided to change out, or, for whatever reason, or you're going at weeds and you're doing these other things. And the things is that your drip system gets nicked and you're having to dig that up and repair it. And if you don't notice it, then you've lost plants. So if anything, I think it takes a little bit more maintenance, but it's worth it. So anyway, those are the 7 principles of Xeriscape.
So are there any kind of misconceptions other than the term Xeriscape? I mean, I guess you kind of already answered that with the maintenance.
I think the biggest misconception is that xeric in and of itself does mean that you don't water it after establishment. But yet that's not what Xeriscape means. And Xeriscaping is more about, good landscaping principles. But the biggest thing is that you're designing and you're planting and you're irrigating things by hydrozone. So you can have zones that use more water. You could have a rain garden. And sometimes people will do that where they're getting rain off their gutter if we get rain. But then you've got other areas of varying levels of irrigation and that they are irrigated accordingly.
Okay. Thanks for all that. That's good info. So you had given us a list of kind of good choices for plants, and it's a pretty big list. And that's great. That gives us a lot of ideas. I wasn't sure if you had any kind of best bet plants that you would think are like your top 3 or 5.
That's really hard. And the truth is there's a ton of choices out there. And so, yes, I did do a list that you guys are going to post that people could click on, and it's 3 pages. And, and to me, it's kind of like, it just depends on whether you're talking about, you want a perennial or you want a grass, or you're talking a tree or a shrub or grasses, There's just a ton of things. And so it's hard to narrow down, maybe some things that people don't necessarily think about. I mean, the last few years with the water conservation garden, we have planted a number of agave up there. And that 2 of them that have done reliable for us is the agave Utah ensis, which is very small. It's a slow grower, stays small. But then there's agave perii neo-mexicana that is doing very well too. Just the straight agave perii is marginal for us. It seems like it'll do well for a couple years and then we'll get a really cold winter and it'll knock it back. But the subspecies neo-mexicana is flying through with great colors. Lead plants, I think, is something people don't use a lot.
What was that?
Amorpha, canescens is a little bit bigger, and Amorpha nana is smaller. They're both just absolutely gorgeous.
I love lambs.
Well,
Lamb's ear is another one.
there's a website that has, in fact,
I got some from another neighbor.
All of mine came from across the street.
there's a website we have at the city, and actually Marita helped us with it, as did a lot of other experts in the area, and it's called SLC Garden Wise. And it's virtual garden tours of waterways, different styles and designs of waterways landscapes throughout our entire service area. And there's a huge plant list. I'll have to check and make sure we still have, that we're up to date, Marita. But she also helped us on the plant descriptions and stuff. So the plant descriptions in there are all local descriptions, so it's how the plant would grow here. And a lot of the ones she's got on her list we have in there, and you can search for them and see photos.
And I can go buy a lot of these at Home Depot or Millcreek Gardens, or where do I get?
I think you need to go to Mill Creek Gardens or some other garden center like that, just for a better.
Progressive Plants has a good.
Okay.
There's a lot more small nurseries around. There's great mail order. But I think as consumers, we have an opportunity here to drive demand. I mean, the problem with the big box stores, I mean, I think they mean well, but frequently their purchasing lists come out of centralized locations. And so they're not necessarily the best plants for our area. But as for instance, when I first came here over 20 years ago as a landscaper, I saw a lot of opportunity, and you could only buy 2 or 3 ornamental grasses in this valley. And there are now hundreds of varieties available. And it's because we taught people about ornamental grasses, and people started wanting different grasses, and consumer demand moved that marketplace. So I think as consumers, we have a real power here to change what our landscape looks like in terms of encouraging and buying from local growers who are going to be risky and bring in something really fun, and not just go to the big box stores, because they're going to be more risk averse. So as consumers, we have a role in this.
Well, and as Red Butte Garden.
And your plant sales.
We have felt that it is our responsibility to help drive the market. We're not,
Absolutely.
we want to be looking at what does well here and encourage people to use it, and we hope that that does drive the market. And we do have our plant sale coming up May 6th and 7th, and I'm sorry, I'm honest, as far as water-wise and native plants go, I don't think you can find a better selection in one place.
That's May 6th and 7th.
I would agree with
May
that.
6th and 7th. You know, I really wish that there were more producers in Utah that grew native and water-wise plants, but unfortunately, there just isn't. And some of the really good ones in the last handful of years have retired. And so if anything, it's gotten worse.
So that's a good time to move on, I think, to Andrea.
Oh, I was just gonna add that Deseret Perennial Gardens, they grow all of their plants here, and Brad is really knowledgeable. So if someone's wanting to do their own yard, it's a really inexpensive place, and he's super knowledgeable, and all of the plants have actually been grown.
Deseret, what was it?
Perennial Gardens, it's on, they just moved to Gladiola Street.
That's the
They're
one that
in
used to
with
be up by the
woodscapes.
landfill.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
woodscapes.
It's like moving a garden store.
So you can
Hard
actually
task.
get your mulch and your plants and some rocks there, and their
Also-
prices are good.
Also Growing Empire on 7th East.
Okay.
And it's
Oh,
on
yeah, that's
Empire
there too.
Street or Avenue, and it's somewhere between 33rd and 39th. And Helen also grows all of, she starts her own plugs. She brings in plants in plug form and grows them in her soil, which is our soil, and does a really, she's like a propagation savant. I mean, she has cool, fun stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so Andrea, you know, as a landscape designer and installation contractor, you know, when I come to you and say, I want to convert my whole yard to Xeriscape or portion, or what, like, where do you kind of start? Where do you?
Well, I start by assessing the space and asking people, what is it that you want to do in your space? Because you don't want to just tear everything up and put rocks in, or, you know, you want to use it as a functional space. And when people have kids, it goes into the other question, you know, if you have kids and dogs, and, you know, you want to design the space around the use of the space. So it's okay, like she was saying, to leave, you know, a small area of grass or put a grass alternative in, and then design around it. The key is to design the irrigation so that you're irrigating the lawn in a way that it's not running down the street. And I mean, I would say absolutely tear all lawn out of park strips. There's no efficient way to irrigate those. So at the very least, people should all tear the park strips out. That's like the number one thing, but, you know, it's,
Music to Stan's ears.
yeah, no, it's absolutely a waste of water and there's no efficient way to irrigate it, so. But, you know, I start from that, you know, asking the questions, what are you gonna use the space for? And then, you know, if you're gonna have a lot of parties, do you want a patio, do you want a deck, you know, what do you wanna do?
So when we talk about the functional aspect of the space, I mean, what are some kind of pointers you can give people to make those spaces functional?
Well, pathways,
Okay.
you know, patios you want things, at least when I try to design things, I like the flow, I like things to flow in a nice way. I don't like a lot of jaggedy corners and that, you know, that makes watering, I don't like a lot of jaggedy corners. It's just kind of my aesthetic. And so I'll encourage a natural flow to things because I think that's more aesthetically pleasing and more natural looking.
Definitely. One thing I've heard too, I heard in a different talk that I thought was a cool concept was have your grass be in the middle with your edging around versus the other way. Like you don't want to have your little garden and then really tough to water and mow.
Yeah, and if you go to localscapes.com, they have a lot of really good ideas. And you can also get rebates through them and flip your strip as well. They have rebates. Not all areas qualify for the flip your strip, and you have to look and see which water district you're in. I think that most people will qualify for the local scapes.
So what are some common mistakes people?
Not separating the irrigation, so putting drip and pop-ups on the same zone, having park strips where they put tall grasses where you're gonna run over little kids. You know, I think there should never be anything over a couple of feet tall in a park strip, and even just when you're pulling out of the driveway. Yeah, a lot of people will just, the irrigation is one of the most common mistakes that I run into. Running a long line of drip that doesn't go back into itself, so it isn't, you know, it's just peters out at the end. You know, you need to have the drip set up properly, you have to put a pressure reducing filter on it, and things like that, just to make sure that you are reducing the pressure and not blowing the lines apart.
Okay. Is there anything that's like grass that's an alternative? Like, you know, I've thought about artificial turf. I've heard that you still have to water those and like you kind of have to wash them or they get
And
hot.
they're really hot. I've installed
So
them.
it just
and
seems like
they're-
it's not a good solution.
No, because I installed it thinking, oh, this will be great. And then it was really hot on the little dog's paws. And so,
We've actually completed recently a white paper with Utah State University researching, researching the research around, studying the research around artificial turf. And, there's a lot of information out there and a lot of misconceptions about it. I would say if you're looking at it, it's an alternative to concrete. It's not an alternative to a landscape.
Interesting.
but there are, you know, she mentioned some of them, buffalo grass. There's a no-mow grass. There's a dog tough grass. There's a whole bunch of them. And
But what about just
High
like
Country
clover?
Gardens has come out with a whole bunch of different, what's that?
Well, isn't there like clover? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
there's
I feel
micro
like-
clovers,
Actually,
yeah,
Clover works well with grass.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're symbiotic. So grass is a really high nitrogen feeding plant and clover puts nitrogen back in the soil. So if you have one or the other, eventually they peter out. But when you blend them together, when the grass starts depleting the nitrogen naturally in the soil, it thins out, the clover actually gets stronger and builds up. Then over time, it puts a lot of nitrogen back in the soil, it kind of thins out, the grass comes back in. So they live really well together and they create a really healthy biome. I think in terms of landscape, especially with lawns, I think something we miss as a huge misconception is that it is one lawn. Like any community, any culture, it's healthier when it's diverse. So if you have multiple kinds of grasses together or grass and ground cover and different things, it doesn't have to be just one plant. When you introduce a lot of different things into your lawn, you can have a really healthy lawn that has much less water need, much less chemical need, supports healthy soil biomes, supports pollinators. the lawn isn't the culprit here. It's the lawn we choose, our relationship to it, and how we water it.
And it's important to deep water too. So if you do have a lawn, I mean, last year I have a little patch of lawn and I watered once a week in a deep water, 30 minutes for a spray head, and my lawn never got brown. So.
And that's on that Denver water rules. I have, you can pull it up if you want. But that was something I learned.
You might want to look at Seawell instead. It's more local than Denver.
Okay.
So Center for Water Efficient Landscaping at USU, and they'll have lawn irrigation information. It's the same research based, but Denver's 1,000 feet higher.
Yep.
And it makes a difference. So Seawell, which is cwel.usu.edu, has great information about all kinds of landscape stuff, but particularly lawn water. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
I just
no,
thought
no.
since
Yeah.
Jason was looking it up, Seawell might be a better source.
And you can actually get tests. They'll come out and do a water cup test to see if you're watering your lawn efficiently as well.
Because
And I
some of the
think
things
that's
I've
free.
heard are, like you said, do it deep water, and do it less days per week.
Mow it higher.
Mow it higher.
Yeah.
So like, what does that mean? Like 3 inches?
I usually set like 3 or 4.
So is that
Lower
like-
setting 3 or 4?
So what's that translate to my mower? Is that like the
Highest
highest setting?
It's like the high middle.
Okay, and I leave the clippings on the grass?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I've heard about this, like kind of like run through your zones. Don't do it for 30 minutes straight because it might like all
Yeah.
run off. So you could do 10 minutes
Yeah.
and then switch to the next zone and then circle back and you get your 30 minutes deep water in a few cycles.
And it's worth mentioning the timer too. If you get an automatic timer like a Ratio or one of the programmable timers, they will automatically do a rain skip and the smart timers.
And I've also heard watering in the morning when there's less wind. And-
Yeah.
And then also if you do it
Evening,
but if you do it at evening, you have potential for mold.
So, well, we're really arid here. So the likelihood of you getting mold on your lawn is pretty slim. Really, so Paul Johnson up at USU did a study, and what they suspect is most grass molds here or funguses are actually caused through the transportation of, so if you have a lawn care company and they come in, they pick it up from someone and they have a dirty lawnmower, which sounds really filthy, and they carry that disease to the next lawn. So if your lawn care company isn't cleaning their mower between, that's really why you get it. So it's more, funguses don't occur naturally here because we're really arid. So if you're overwatering or you're not mindful in keeping your lawnmower clean, you can get funguses. And then the other principle you mentioned, that turning it on and off, that's called cycle soak.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
And is especially important if you're on a slope.
And
But
if,
anytime.
and if, when you have dry soil, because our soil's drying out with the drought, right?
Yeah. Well, clay soils stop absorbing moisture after about 8 or so minutes. The
Okay.
platelets swell. So cycle soak gives an opportunity for water from a sprinkler, which puts out water really fast, it breaks the surface tension, gets the soil wet, and it moves on to the next zone, and then it waters again. So water has a chance to start percolating through the soil profile. So you get more water actually in the soil, and you can water less because you're not getting the runoff. So-
Michael, we had a water question come in from the online chat. Should I interject that now?
Please.
And it's a little more general, but I think it might be something that would help people with decisions. And that is, what kind of water savings can we expect from xeroscaping versus the contractor standard of putting in bluegrass, which is, like, I guess, what builders do. So, and let's say someone does like their front lawn, and maybe their park strip in a typical Salt Lake City yard. And is that possible to gauge, or are there too many variables? And I guess the question I would have, actually, looks like we could have an answer, like, can you talk about water? Can you talk about money as well, like your water bill?
I can talk about my water bill. I added up the units, the blocks. I don't know how much of that is, but on your water bill, it says how many units of water you use.
One CCF is 748 gallons. It just
Okay,
happens.
so there's that much. I added that up for July, August, and September. I was interested after I was invited to do this, how my water usage had changed. And I bought my house in 2013 and kept all the settings, I think, when I moved in. I was probably set by the family who wanted a beautiful lawn to sell their house. It worked. And I used 64 units over that 3-month period. And then by 2021, I'd taken out all the lawn except for the front park strip and the side little, like, I don't know, 7 foot wide all the way back. And in 2021, I used 10 units over the 3 months.
I think the biggest thing, but Jenna is really engaged and knowledgeable and paying attention. Any landscape can be overwatered. And I think that's the important thing for, like, I would imagine also for Andrea's clients. She could put in a really great, well-designed xeriscape, but a custom person, we could still overwater it. So I think the most important factor in whether or not you save water in your landscape is how you water your landscape. And I think that's really more than anything else, it's how we water our landscapes. Any landscape can be overwatered. I think we own that.
I did that too. Before I took out the front yard, I was down to 27 units in 2017. So I cut it in half just over the years living there.
And as stuff gets
down.
established, you water less.
I didn't put any, it was already,
Yeah.
it was there. I just turned everything down a little bit by bit.
And this is despite it raining less.
Yeah.
We have some interesting statistics on residential water use in our service area.
Like,
Well, for instance, then this goes to the landscape question. What landscape matters? What we know, so there's a program called Water Maps. It's in conjunction with Utah State University. And it sounds a little big brotherish, and we don't mean it to be, but using aerial imagery that's generally available. So if you were to get on realtor.com or Zillow or any of those others, you'd see, you see all those aerial imagery. We use aerial imagery, a collection of them. They've created an algorithm that then creates a classification for landscape types. So we've divided landscapes into certain characteristics. Then based on those characteristics, we assign a water value based on what's called evapotranspiration. This is also very geeky and sciencey, but this is totally who I am. So sorry about that. But what we do, so evapotranspiration is an estimated value of water that a plant needs as it grows. So we estimate how much water a specific landscape needs by an aerial photograph. We then compare that to actual meter water use data. And we can then assign a ratio of how much a property is over or under watering. We're working on finalizing some of what the report looks like. We're hoping that by early summer, if not soon, it probably won't be sooner because it's already the end of May or April, that we'll be able to send out to every single household within our service area this water report. And what we know from doing this analysis over our service area is, on the good news, if we think of the ratio to water need to water use, it's roughly, like, we look at it as a percentage of how much people over or under water. Most people are overwatering, 64% or so, maybe between 40 and 50% more than they need to. So actually, we have a capacity to conserve water in our landscape without changing a single thing in our landscape. And I think that's the important thing. You don't have to buy anything, you don't have to rip anything out. You just have to be smarter about how we're watering. So I think that's a really important lesson. Now, we could do even more by getting rid of grass in dumb areas or picking smarter grasses or fixing our drip systems. But if we just were more attentive about how we water our landscapes and our public landscapes, we would go a long way to being very sustainable. And I have to give a shout out to our parks and golf courses. They're actually doing a tremendous job and working really hard. But yeah, we are coming up with some really interesting stuff. USU has been a great partner with us. So yeah, I think Jenna's like the example, like she moved into this landscape, and over time and just better management has reduced the water footprint without really changing a lot.
Run through those numbers again, Jenna, when you bought the house and what it is now, the
Okay,
units of water.
the 64 units with full lawn and
Uh-huh.
the full like heavy water use settings on the sprinkler. And then before I changed anything really, down to about 30,
So you cut it in half,
I cut it in half by watering
just
less.
being smarter about how you want.
And then, and yeah, by, listening to, hearing about overwatering and time of day and length of duration of watering. And then after taking out both front yard and backyard grass, last year it was, and establishing the plants a bit, it was 10 last year. Also, I quit watering, like I just really did not water the grass at all.
And then come back. We're going.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do over there, so I just gave up on it.
Good job.
Right, so, I don't know how we're doing on time, Jason.
We're good, yeah.
There's a
Okay,
question.
so-
about-
Yeah, I have a question about parking strips. And years ago when, now I want to make it clear, I am totally out of compliance in my yard. I mean,
Just don't tell us where you live.
seriously,
Yeah, don't tell me what, no, I'm done.
you'll know.
I don't.
live down my street. But anyway, when they did all that road work on 9th South years ago, they put in nice grass, sod, trees. If you go down 9th South now, it's a mess. So I'm thinking, is that part of the contract that they put out when they do road work in the city? Do they make it a part of the contract to plant trees and sod because it's not cared for? And if you go down 9th South,
Yeah.
well, I'm talking part of the 9th South, 7 feet up to the whale, kind of. Is that part of the contract when they issue a contract? I know, so I'm wondering, are they gonna do that again and trees have died?
know the specifics.
Would you?
I-
Specifics of the landscape plan.
I don't know, but what I do know is, for instance, on Third West, where they've done all the street work,
Yeah,
they're putting in rain gardens and they're designing catchments so that water from the street flows into these garden spaces so that it also filters the stormwater. So I know the city's working really hard towards improving it's called green infrastructure. And I know so that's where you build street design to help manage and accommodate things like stormwater and such like that in a
they do that
smarter,
in
sensible way.
Portland, I think.
Yeah, and they're doing it here now too, and they're working, the dilemma we have is, a rain garden is easy to plant in Portland where you have rain.
Right, yeah.
When we do something that is a catchment that's gonna collect water and then plants, we have long stretches of time where there's not gonna be water going into that. So how do we pick the right plants that can survive periodic inundation and flooding, but then really dry spells? And we're working really hard on it. We're trialing out different kinds of plants. We're really focusing on things like daylilies and certain ornamental grasses. So the plant palette's gonna be pretty small for these spaces.
The trees have all died,
Yeah.
and they weren't maintained,
Yeah.
and,
And the
That
trees are
yes.
important because
They
they
are.
provide the shade, and then I feel like my yard, the areas that get a lot of shade, the grass lives, and the areas that don't.
well, next time you go down North South, parking strips are very wide,
Yeah,
and they're not maintained, they're just,
and I don't know the answer to
fine weed now.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, because that's not, I hate to say that's not the
There's
part of my
no-
job, but I've written it down and I'll help find an answer too. I mean, I'm happy to help find an answer. But I think this is also important about park strips is when we talk about not watering them. When you have trees in your park strip, you need to water your park strip. And I think there are better ways like drip, emitter hoses. There's drip systems called inline emitters that can water narrow spaces fairly efficiently, but we need to be mindful of protecting our urban forest, which is it habitates the park strip, and so not watering it also then leads to urban health decline, or increases in heat island effect, which will then add to other issues with water because of heating and cooling needs.
Well, what I've decided to do is I'm not putting water on the turf. I don't have any.
You don't
turf
have
left.
to, yeah.
I'm planting food. Well, I should say my neighbor
I
is.
think it's great.
I have a sharecropper.
So I do want to move us along just so we can get to Jenna here. So thank you
We've
for.
got a couple more questions from online when you're ready.
Okay, Jenna, I did want to ask about your experience with doing this yourself, because I've done some things myself, and there's some things I feel like I need a contractor for, but I don't know how expensive it is. I don't know if I want to spend the money on it. And so what was your experience? Tell us what you did, why you did what you did, how much it cost.
Okay, well, I first was admiring all of the native plants and yards that looked really good, and I tried a few things out in small areas. And then I decided I kind of resented the fact that I had this whole outdoor space that I was supposed to take care of as a homeowner, and I want to do as little as possible. So I didn't want to spend very much money. So I just put down cardboard and then covered my yard with mulch. And it worked really good, pretty well. So that cost about, I would say, $500 to do the front yard, to buy all of the mulch and the plants that I put in. And some plants didn't work and had to rearrange them.
So factoring
Maybe
for
less.
today's pricing, that's 3 times as much? or-
Probably. Yeah, well, I don't know how much the
I'm just.
mulches cost, I can't remember. Anyway, so that's what I did, the bare minimum, and the weeds come up, but you know, I feel like it isn't getting rid of the work. Like, there's no work-free yard, but I don't mind sitting there and pulling weeds out. That is a work that I would rather do than mowing. I don't like, and lawn care I don't like. I really hated all of the morning glories that would come out of my yard. So I thought, you know, then they still come out. They have roots that go straight to hell.
Yeah.
They come right out. And so then in the backyard, I took.
I think we're actually gonna find that the earth is not a molten core, it's bindweed.
Backyard's bigger, and I also have an aging sprinkler system that didn't get to the back half of my backyard, so that part always looked like crap. I got a trampoline, and my kids didn't care about the yard, the grass anymore, and they got bigger, so I didn't have to be on the ground all the time. So I covered the whole backyard with paper base, and then rented this device that is like a big roller that packs it down. So I really did a very minimal work on it, and it's fine. It really does not look like shit. It's really like people come over and they say, "Oh, this is not a bad yard. It's good enough." And the edge looks really nice. That part has all these rocks that I like, and I also brought in a lot of rocks that I had a friend who had a pile of rocks in his yard and wanted to make his. I just didn't want it, so I have a kind of a hodgepodge rock pile, and the paper-based situation cost more because there was a lot of rocks that I brought in, but I overestimated the rocks, so I would say it's maybe $1,500 that I spent on the rocking of the backyard, and there's so much extra that I'm not going to need the edging rocks, but I think I do need to repave the base because it wasn't quite.
So now that after you dealt with install and lived with it, and you know, what would you do differently?
I would put more cardboard. There were areas where I didn't put enough cardboard in those. I can really see the weeds coming through. Also, I went kind of sunflower crazy, and last year my yard had too many sunflowers. Like, it was really out of control. So I learned from my mistake, and every day I pull out a few sunflower self-starters. And also, I guess I thought that stuff would just grow if I liked it and put it in the spot I wanted it. And that's not the case. Some things do, but then some things don't. And then some plants I didn't know, like I just didn't know what I liked. So I just tried different things in different places. And then some did really, really well. So I would buy another one to go next to it because it seemed to work there. And I just was trying to figure, there has to be a way to do it rather inexpensively, and that doesn't require expertise, because, you know, otherwise only a garden expert could own a house that looked good.
Yeah. or
Which I
somebody who gets a
can't
contract.
believe that's true.
But, so I guess that's another question of, I mean, it sounds like you dove in pretty confidently and said, oh, I'm gonna be able to do all this stuff myself, and
I just went for it.
yeah, that's awesome. So, you know, what things do you think you probably should have had a contractor for?
If I really wanted it to look like better, or if I wanted
For the
it
whole
to-
thing,
the
or?
whole thing, yeah. I mean, I think.
That looks great.
You know, I'm not gonna say where I live, but it does look pretty good. But I think it, like, you know, you look at a magazine and you think, I like that yard a lot, or that guy with the pre-recorded video, his yard looks awesome.
We'll have to ask you later, Stan, how much of that you did yourself versus hired.
Red Butte Garden and Lifelong Learning offer lots of classes in landscape design for homeowners, and they're designed for folks who aren't experts, they're not professionals, but you have a picture in your head, how do you translate that into your landscape? So there are places to go locally to get
Local
classes
schemes too.
So I know we have some questions there. Do you mind if we just talk to Stephanie first real
Yeah.
quick?
You just answered one with the Red Butte Garden classes. That was one of the questions.
And
Where
like-
can people get advice?
and lifelong learning, University of Utah.
The conservation garden has a lot of classes as well.
Okay. So Stephanie,
Now the boring questions.
well, I think they're
Ready.
the most important questions in a lot of ways, you know? I mean, so with the drought situation, do you
Yeah.
think it's gonna be worse this year, better,
Okay.
same?
Well, I looked at some charts and I reached out to Laura Briefer, who's our director of public utilities, who has been, you know, all of us at public utilities are, we are monitoring supply and demand every day. This is what we do, this is our job, this is what we're good at, this is what we believe in. So right now, current conditions are such that soil moisture is better than last year. And you may think, so what? But soil moisture is really important. So when we look at the drought, there's a lot of factors. There's snowfall, and there's rain, there's runoff. But last year what happened is we didn't have a lot of snowfall, but going into the snow in the wintertime, fall was really super dry. So the ground really dried out. So when the snow came and it landed on dry soil, when it melted in the spring, it sunk into the soil and it didn't run off. So we had, not only did we have a low snowpack, but we also didn't have much runoff because the soils were so dry. And this is in the Wasatch and our watershed. This year, we have much better soil moisture. It's up. It's the only thing that's up, but it's up. So our snowpack is about this. Hey, we're going for anything we can get. The snowpack is about the same as last year. But soil moistures are higher, so we're expecting at least that the runoff will be okay. Right now, our reservoirs in our area right here look all right. The Deer Creek system is about 85% of capacity. So it's not great, it's not horrible, but that's our situation in our service area. The thing about Utah is so many different communities have very, very different and distinct water supplies and sources. So our situation may not be, Weaver Basin's situation may not be someone else's situation, but right here in our service area, we're doing okay.
Where does our water come from?
Between 80 and 90% or so from the Wasatch or from runoff. So about 40 to 60% of that is the Wasatch runoff, and then 30 to 50%, depending again on the time of year and such, is from the Deer Creek Provo system. And then we get about 10 to 15% from groundwater, again, depending on, we mostly use that during the summertime.
So is that higher up and it flows down to us? Okay.
Yeah. So right out here, and it doesn't look very good lower levels right now, but we have more snow in the upper levels, which is good. Last year it was actually reversed. We had pretty good snow in the lower levels, but less snow higher up. So right now it's not, I mean, obviously we would like the drought to be over, but it's not, we're okay. And we're also okay because public utilities has spent decades making sure we have redundant infrastructure, that we have good storage capacity. And we've worked hard with our community, and you guys did a phenomenal job last year saving water. I mean, voluntary compliance with requests for water conservation in Salt Lake City, in our service areas, Salt Lake City, Cottonwood Heights, Murray or Millcreek, Holiday, little bits of Murray and South Salt Lake. Over 2 billion gallons of water reduced last year. 2 billion, babies, 2 billion. That was you. And our parks and our golf, so thank you. But we need to do that again this year. We don't know when the drought's going to end. Although we think of it more as we're not really in a drought as much as the last 20 years were a wet cycle. So depending on which USU or USGS study you look at. So we're okay, but everyone has to be really mindful. We don't have water to waste.
So when I lived in Denver, they had these water restrictions, and I mean, people would call on other people and say,
we do.
And I work for the federal government, and we have a lot of buildings that are in high visibility places, downtown Denver, downtown Salt Lake. And so, if you're breaking the rules, people are going to call on you. It's bad.
Well, when
bad PR for us.
Yeah.
So I mean, when are we going to start seeing? I heard about the stage 2 water conservation last week.
Stage 2 drought.
When will we see restrictions? What will those restrictions look like?
Well, okay, that's a great question. So the way our drought, it's actually called a water shortage contingency plan, because we might have a water shortage because of, say, some infrastructure failure or some contamination or some other issue, an earthquake. So, but regardless of what causes it, and right now it's a drought, we have 5 stages. And what we look at are 2 things, demand and supply. So we look at supply, which is dwindling, but you guys are our partners in this. So if demand as it goes down, if supply goes down, as demand goes down, if demand stays below supply, we avoid restrictions. So our community is a direct partner in how well we manage a drought. So we don't look at just supply, we look at what we're all doing as users of water. So right now, because of our community response, we've been able to stay in stage 2. And that's all of our community. And we did this last winter. What I do in the wintertime is I analyze water numbers. I'm really fun at parties. So I know how much water industries have used, hotels, restaurants, homeowners, multi-unit dwelling structures. I know what they saved indoors and outdoors as a classification, and everyone did a really good job last year. We had some indoor reductions. We had a lot of outdoor reduction, which was great. And as long as we keep doing that, we can avoid restrictions. The thing about restrictions, you mentioned Denver. I called them when they did their big thing, because they literally had people go out with cameras and time how long your sprinklers run. Do you know how much it cost to enforce that in Denver that year, that one summer? $500,000.
And more pollution and
yeah, some of them were electric vehicles or Cushmans, but the other part of that then they go into a court, the judge is overwhelmed and he tosses those out. So it's not necessarily helping. The other thing about restrictions, when you have day of the week restrictions, like if you only allow people to water 1 day a week, that's helpful. If you say you can only water, say, every other day, what you get is people water banking. So, or they water hoard, like they think, oh, I can't water for 2 days. I'm really scared my yard will go dry. I'm going to water anyway because it's my day. So that's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily save water. People think it sounds good, but if you do the actual math, which is what I do, I'm a part of a national group of water conservation, other geeks like me, water conservation managers, and we analyze data. That's what we do. We're so fun. We think we're fun. But what we know collectively is some of these things work, and they work in certain ways, sometimes they don't. So if we do and we could get to restrictions on how often you can water, but that's farther down, that's a farther stage. But if we all do what we did last year, we won't have to do that. You won't have to worry about that. Now, we do have mandates on institutional properties. So before we ask you guys before you're mandated or restricted, city park, city golf, other types of institutions have requirements for what they do. So they have to stay within their budget. They have windows of when they can water. They have other things they have to do, and they did a great job last year. Like our parks and golf reduced water nearly, it's like 20 some odd %, 25%. They did a stellar job. Homeowners did a great job. Businesses did a great job. There was one group that could have done better. I won't name names.
So I got a couple other questions that I didn't have on the list for you that I think you'll like.
You might have to wrap up like pretty soon.
Okay.
That's right.
So.
I do want to clear up one misconception about the Park Strip code.
Okay, would you want to tell us
No,
that?
you asked me your question.
Well, how are we gonna enact real change? I
I
mean,
think
there's
we're
like,
enacting real change.
what is it through social pressure? Is it through code changes? Is it through, how are we doing?
If they're honestly, so I've been in this gig for now, I'm coming on my 21st year. So I started this when I was 12. When we began our conservation programs in earnest, now the utility's first real conservation program was in the 1980s. But when we began in earnest in 1920 or in 2001, when we created the position of conservation. So when they said Salt Lake City doesn't, we have a robust conservation program. Peak demand is how much water, the one day of year that we deliver the most water. And it's a big deal because our infrastructure, all the pipes and everything, the treatment system, all has to be designed to deliver water on that day and fight fires. 20 years ago, that number was 217 million gallons in a single day. Do you want to know what that number is now?
Yeah.
It's 163. That's sustained, dependable reduction in peak demand. Peak demand is driven by outdoor water use.
That's with more people.
I love you. Thank you for saying that. Indeed, with a lot more people and more businesses. Salt Lake City, our service area is the most highly industrialized. Before the COVID, we have a standing population of 360,000 people within our service area. Every single day, 150,000 people came into our service area to go to work or to go to school. So we grew by almost 50% every single day in terms of commuters coming in and using our water. And yet over that time, we reduced our peak demand by 30%. We've reduced our daily water use, our annual water use by 22%. We've gone from an average water delivery in our landscapes from about 56 inches a season, no kidding, to 36. Now we have to get to 24. That's part of our conservation plan. That's how we make it sustainable. But that is change. We need to give ourselves credit for this. And I know it's really easy to say, oh, I see this person watering and it's a bad thing, but oh my gosh, you guys have done a stellar job. We just need to do more. So that is change. But if there was one way to do it, I would have done that already. We need all the things. We need people helping. We need education. We need good codes, which we have. We need, did I say education like 3 times yet? Financial supports. We're getting incentives finally. All of those things are what we need.
Well, educate us on the Park Strip.
The quick story is the Park Strip code was actually revised in, the last revision was actually closer to about 10 years ago. And it was when they said, the part about having to have grass in the Park Strip was removed almost 20 years ago. The part about only needing a third of it planted was about 12 or so years ago. And the idea there is, again, there's a lot of competing interests with these landscape codes. It's not just about water use, it's about walkability, urban forest health, public safety in terms of visibility, even, community aesthetics, stormwater quality. So the planning department has a real challenge in balancing all these competing interests, and everyone's interest thinks they're the most important interest to find a compromise. So requiring that 1/3 of the area be planted was a compromise. I think it's a pretty fair one. There's a lot of stuff. These folks can tell you all kinds of stuff that can go in that Park Strip. You don't have to water once it's established. I have a grass you could put in your Park Strip that you don't have to water once it's established. Grass. So really the trick is just, the right plant, right place, do the right thing, be smart about it. It's really simple, totally simple.
Question.
50 years ago, there was a drought in California and they had this slogan, if it's yellow, it's mellow.
If it's brown, flush it down. I was
Right.
there.
I haven't heard that.
That was
since.
me, no.
Does that make any sense?
Not anymore, because back then plumbing fixtures had higher volume. Now with low volume toilets, that could actually be a problem because the tanks are much smaller, they're pushing less water through. So there's actually a study going on, no kidding, right now on the impact of low flush toilets and the inclination of people to flush less often on movement through sewer systems. So unless you have an old toilet tank that is like a 6 gallon capacity, don't do that. Because your toilet is designed to only hold a gallon, like anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2 gallons of water. I told you I was a geek. It's totally true. So yeah, that used to be the case, but not anymore.
Okay, good,
We're
thank you.
building smaller toilets.
Thank you.
Maybe one wrap-up question, if you could, that would be resources that people could seek out to investigate xeriscaping. There are a bunch of questions like that.
You know, if you've been looking at the questions, why don't you throw one of those
Well,
out?
yeah, but just maybe march down the panel, like people can just ask, give the best resource they can provide for our audience.
Or your number one tip, or, you know,
I'm gonna give you a couple resources.
we only want to give us
Now,
one.
Stephanie mentioned before that the USU Extension Seawell, so they have a great list on
See wells.
water-wise plants.
They're-
See,
CWEL.usu.edu.
so that one's a great one. There is a website that's just www.plantnative.org that has a list of native plants, is a good one. I also like Plant Select. That's a collaboration between Colorado State University and Denver Botanical Gardens.
Okay.
But plantselect.org has a lot of plants. High Country Gardens has a number of really great plant ideas too. I tend not to buy from them too often because they're very tiny and they're very expensive, but it's a good place to get an idea and then look for it locally. So that's another idea.
All right, who else has got ideas?
Well, I already said the localscapes.com, flip your strip. There's also Slow the Flow, they have a lot of rebates. Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District has a lot of classes. I took the qual class there, but I think they also have classes for homeowners. And then you can get rebates. If you take the class, you get $1.25 a square foot for your work strip, I believe. And then if you don't take their class and they just come and measure, you get $1 per square foot. So
Cardboard? Go to
No,
get the
also
cardboard?
neighbors, I took all of my rounds here from a couple cuttings from my neighbor across the street. And it's grown gangbusters. So I've traded some other plants with people like didn't like something or were getting rid of them by their yard.
I like that idea, because I was just walking around and I was like, do you mind if I was like, how do you get the lambs here to grow so well? And she was like, take it.
Yeah.
Take it. And so I literally walked back and had like a couple grocery bags filled with lambs
I
here.
think gardeners are generous.
And then, did you have any other tips besides?
Well, I would say, I think the utilities have our conservation page. We also, we have links to all these other sites that are being mentioned. The rebates are actually through utahwatersavers.org. But if you go to the utility website is slc.gov/utilities/conservation. And we have linked to the Utah Water Savers, to Slow the Flow, to Red Butte, to USU, to the water check program. If you have a lawn and you want to water smarter, then get a free water check and you'll save water.
you can also get a chip drop, and you can also talk to arborists if you're trying to get a lot of mulch for really cheap.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it cheap. Several of I think the West Valley waste treatment has a chip drop. So they'll just come and dump a whole bunch of chips.
Cool.
That's actually a great point. At the garden, we use compost from the landfill, which is, it's a recycled product.
Isn't it like dirt cheap too? I thought it was like $25 for a whole.
But we use for mulch what they grade as compost because it then degrades faster and helps improve the soil, and we really don't fertilize. So,
Yeah, one of my friends got that last year and I think he paid like $25 to fill his back of his pickup.
It's about a yard, cubic yard.
So.
I think the core advice is just be mindful how we use water, whether it's outdoors or indoors. Don't use it without thought. And we'll all do a good job. We can all have gardens that bring us joy.
Well, if I can just say one last thing too, I put together that list of 3 pages of plants, and those are things that are doing well at Red Butte Garden. I'm very confident they will do well for others, and I hope that people take advantage, look at that list and come on up and visit Red Butte Garden, and you can see them in person and kind of see if that's something that you would like to use. So,
And you posted that, right?
It's posted online, and there's actually a QR code over by the door. You can download it on your phone.
All right, can we get a hand for the panel here?